it is the case that, let's assume the commission's rule, the original rule, had become the rule, and using our example, 60 is my base salary, and we're going to bargain over what I'm going to make next year. Under Act 10, I, the employer, could say, Davis, guess what? Our proposal is you're making 50 next year. And the union says, no, we want them to make 61 or whatever. And we go back and forth, and I, the employer, stay with my 50. I will be able to unilaterally implement 50 if we can't reach an agreement. So the union will have had an opportunity to bargain about it. I will have been obligated to talk to them, fight with them over what it is. But in the end, the employer would be able to implement 50, and my pay would become 50. So no rule.
Even with that.
Even
that's
with the
under
big
Act
pie.
10.
That's
under Act 10.
That's exactly right. So I think it's important, to sort of view it in an Act 10 context and understand, and I would say this even generally, there's never been in the collective bargaining process a guarantee that I'm going to make the same amount of money next year. If it's bargainable, generally I make the same or more, but there's no guarantee, never has been a guarantee.
Except QEO. There was, but that's gone now.
That's right. Yeah. If I made a QEO, but if I were the employer and said, I'm not doing QEO, I'm proposing to cut your pay, and I'll take it to an interest arbitrator, which they had to do. If the interest arbitrator bought it, my pay would be cut. Now, you're right, in the real world, that didn't happen. But it was theoretically possible. And before interest arbitration, if you go back to the 60s and the 70s, when there was no interest arb, I, the union, could propose whatever I wanted on all sorts of things, wages. But in the end, if we didn't reach a deal, and I, the employer, for whatever reason wanted to cut your pay, I could do it. Now, I would pay a price. There might be a strike.
Right.
People's morale sucks, they go work somewhere else, all these things, but at least as a labor law principle, I could pull that off if I wanted to do so. If you view bargaining as some kind of a guarantee that my wages are not going to be reduced or altered under Act 10, that certainly is not the case. But I would also say that
bargaining is no guarantee against wage reduction.
I think that's right. And if you don't have interest arbitration in play, even if there were no Act 10, that would be true. So back again in 1975, let's say, Madison teachers and the board bargained. Board could have said, we're proposing a 2% cut. And collective bargaining process would have allowed them to implement that process. Now, chances are they would have had to go through an illegal strike in response, and who knows how it turns out. But labor law-wise, there had never been a guarantee that my pay isn't going to get cut. It depends to some extent on the employer's position. So in that sense, you're right. If the employer doesn't propose a cut, it isn't going to get cut. If the employer proposes a cut, it might happen.
And so there was interest arbitration up until Act 10, and Act 10 removed it.
That's correct. And in some ways, that's, I'll
deal.
say the biggest story.
That's the biggest story.
That's right. Right. Now, there's not much to bargain over, and in the end, the employer can have its way, if you will, as long as they go through the bargaining process. Excuse me. Now, Act 10 doesn't prohibit communication, input, discussion over all of these issues, both the base wage issue, which is bargained, but this, let's assume there's some discretion now in terms of compensation, this educational thing. For sure, in my view, the unions will go to the school board meeting and speak their piece. Most places, I believe, there will actually be discussion. There will be interchange about that topic. And who's to say I'm right about this? I would say, and I have said, so I'll say it again, I would believe that in the real world, there will be very few places where there will actually be a reduction in wage compensation. Not to say that people might not be compelled to work more. I think that's probably going to happen. A teacher will have to teach an extra class some places that previously didn't have to teach. But I don't think the employer wants to or has the stomach for actual reductions, taking that 60,000 teacher and saying you're making 50 next year. I just don't think it'll happen.
They'd cut positions before they do that.
I think that's correct. And I think they'd only do that when they literally didn't have any money left.
Right.
They won't kind of have a nice war chest where, we could give you the money, we got the money, but we're not. We're just going to cut your pay, because that's not what school boards are about, I think, by and large. They're about educating kids as well as they can and having happy is perhaps not the word, as satisfied a teaching staff as they can come up with, because they know morale plays a role in terms of how that teaching comes across in the classroom.
But these are But what's happened here is rights have actually been removed from.
Correct.
I mean,
and there's no doubt about that.
Right.
Again, rule or no rule.
Those rights.
Act 10, I'd
gone.
say, was the key piece of this. To some extent, we're kind of dancing around the deck of the Titanic, talking about this. The ship sank with Act 10, and we're worrying about who gets the life preservers.
Mm-hmm.
I'll say this. I think, since last July 29th or whenever I think that's when it came into effect, it's been clear as a bell, I think, that all these rights, forget compensation for a second, my job protection, my ability to transfer, promote, am I going to make overtime, what are my hours of work, how much do I have to work, all those things that contracts used to have, that big 150-page document, gone. Now we just have one page, which is how much is my base wage. Now, I would have thought, to the extent anybody cares, they would have started caring right then and there, because, hey, all that stuff is now discretionary with my employer.
Yeah.
There's only this tiny little piece left. So,
and it just got smaller.
And it just got smaller. The tiny little piece got a little bit smaller. I would agree.
Yeah.
And that question is, in those unique circumstances where the employer requires that I have a master's or requires that I have a PhD, the master's lane or the PhD lane is the applicable lane for that person. They don't get rolled back to the bachelor.
Okay.
But let's take a master's degree as the minimum, and I've got MA plus 24. I got 24. I lose the 24, but I go back to the master's and stall out there.